let's move ahead now. And you see that big grin on David Glenn's face. That's because his beloved Philadelphia Eagles are the champions of the world. They come out of nowhere. They were the massive underdog, and they reach up and they knock down, just like Rocky Balboa, the mean, evil guys in red, the Kansas City Chiefs. And as I was watching the Duke Clemson game down in Little John Coliseum over the weekend, I was reminded that Drago, Dolph Lundgren, the actor, is actually a graduate of Clemson. So it was apropos when they finally get the lead there in the last 10 minutes, and you get the feeling it was like a flashback to that scene out of Rocky 4.
Got him hurt bad. Yeah. Now he's worried. You're cutting. You're hurting. You see? You see? He's not a machine. He's a man.
Nieprawda.
Right there. That's a perfect analogy for Clemson and Duke. That was a heck of a game, but Duke is fallible. We've been talking about, and rightly so, how magnificent Duke is. I did a post on X during the game. I took a shot of the Blue Devil huddle and said between the student athletes who will go on to play in pro basketball and the ones that will go on to work in industry and the coaches over there, there's probably $1 billion of career earnings on that bench. But sometimes that's not enough. And right now, I think that Duke, that might be the best thing ever to happen to them, Coach Keating, because if you get a loss, it kind of gives an opportunity for the coaches to go in there and reset. David, you've seen it a lot of times here in the ACC, and Coach, I know you've been a part of that, drawing up those X's and O's.
Yeah, it's a conundrum because you never really want to lose, right? You want to win every game, especially when you're that type of caliber team that can run the table almost through the ACC tournament into March. I mean, they've put themselves on that pedestal along with Auburn nationally right now. But from a coaching standpoint, yes, sometimes you want to take that loss at the right time. And Clemson's not a bad loss in any sense of the word. It's not going to cost them a seed line. It's not like they lost to Miami or Notre Dame or even Virginia Tech or anyone in the bottom of the ACC, albeit even at home or on the road. So I'm sure there'll be some sort of film study and motivation. I think this is also helpful too, because you're coming into a type of team, as we mentioned, that's a structure a little bit differently than the modern team, right? Playing against two bigs. There'll be some defensive study as to what they can do from a defensive standpoint to play against a team like that. And there'll certainly be some offensive study as to what didn't happen and what wasn't successful and where their offense was going. I think it was one of the first times they shot under 50% from the field all year long, right? They were great from two. I think they finished I think it was 47 per day. Duke had the best. Let me flip it around. Duke had the best 2-point defense, and Clemson took advantage of that. But on the other side, they weren't as effective offensively until kind of flag got going late. It almost became the game that Tyrese Proctor bailed them out, right? And we know that they have that in them. So there's always some sort of shining light within the muck, right? And I think that's one thing. Tyrese does have that ability to put up a 20, 25-point game. It just didn't happen to come out on the winning side. Very delicate balance, Michael. You never really want to accept that you can get something positive out of a loss and you're trying to win every game. But I'm certain that Duke staff will come out of this game and probably bode well if they happen to face Clemson in the ACC final come ACC tournament time.
I was struck by the fact that apparently when the ESPN broadcasters asked before the game, Clemson coach Brad Brownell, who's been around for a long time and is now one of the elder statesmen in this league, when they asked him, what was the first thing you think of, Coach? If you're going to beat Duke tonight, what do you think needs to happen? And Brad Brownell's first answer was, we better hit 10 threes or more. And I bring that up because Clemson only hit 4 threes for the game, which means you have to be really efficient just head-to-head, mano a mano, pugilism style to run off of Mike's Ivan Drago reference. And the Tigers did that. One thing I think you need to beat Duke, and obviously we're nitpicking the Blue Devils here, just to be clear, we all know, understand, accept, realize that the Blue Devils remain the team to beat. And as Coach said, they're not following a seed line just because you lose to a really good team at Clemson. But you have to have some length and defenders to deal with Cooper Flagg. If you want to beat Duke, you better find a way to make him at least inefficient. He's still got 18 points, but he shot 6 for 17 from the field. That is inefficient, improved a little bit because he did hit those three-pointers down the stretch. But Clemson reminded me of a classic old Carolina team. It's like, oh, there's Victor Locken, a true 7-footer who was a multi-year starter at Cincinnati. There's Ian Shefflin, kind of the modern day power forward, Euro 4, if you want to call him that. There's Chauncey Wiggins off the bench. That guy's like 6'9" or so with really long arms. The former Duke player, Christian Reeves, only played a handful of minutes, but he's a legit 7-footer plus, right? So there's what? That's at least 4 guys that have old school Carolina style length to deal with a Duke team that's one of the tallest and has one of the biggest wingspans of any team in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference. And so the Tigers matched that. I thought it was really wise of Brad Brownell to tweak his starting lineup. He put Chase Hunter's brother, Dylan, in the starting lineup. I know Dylan played a ton. I think he was out there to start. But that means you essentially trying to beat Duke, which is a very good defensive team. They just smother you with that length and that wingspan. That's 3 point guards, essentially, or call some of them combo guards if you want. Chase Hunter's a combo guard. Jaden Zachary was the starting point guard at Boston College for the last 3 years before transferring to Clemson this year. And then Dylan Hunter, younger brother, he's a point guard. So, I think Clemson had maybe a dozen turnovers, which is not a horrible number against one of the best defensive teams in the nation. Duke lost despite guys hitting 12 out of 24 three-pointers. I mean, there's no way. Brad Brownell's an incredibly smart guy. There's no way he would have predicted, Duke will hit 12 out of 24. We, the Tigers, will hit 4 out of 10, but we're going to win by 6. Like, you got to really beat a team. And Clemson dominated the boards against Duke. I think Duke is, as Coach said, forced to look in the mirror. Kamen Malawach is not a comfortable offensive player. He's a butterfingers, not strong with the ball guy down low, and you got to factor that into the equation. He plays half the game, if not more. Knipple got into foul trouble. That's going to matter. He's probably their second best player besides Cooper Flagg, of course. Despite Tyrese Proctor having a phenomenal game, despite Sion James starting point guard, 0 turnovers. There's a lot of good that Duke did in that game, including 50% from three-point land. And yet they lost. So John Shire certainly not going to panic. He knows his team better than we possibly could from the outside. It's a brilliant Duke team. It's the number 1 seed, probably, Duke team. You could argue that they deserve number 1 in the polls, even despite this loss to Clemson, as much as anybody in the entire country, given their entire body of work. But you can be great and still be beatable. And that's what we were reminded of when Clemson took out a Duke team that played well in many ways at Little John Coliseum.
The fact that Clemson won that game the way they did, 77-71, and they did that by leaving a lot of points on the table. And here's what I'm talking about. They missed a lot of free throws. They missed a few front ends of 1-on-1. So that could be, let's say that was 10, 11 points. You get half of that. That means this was a first-rate ass kicking. And I think that's something, when you look at Duke, it's still amazing to me the plethora of talent that John Shire has at his disposal when a guy like Caleb Foster is rotting over there like he's waiting on somebody to score 100 points so they can give out Bojangles biscuits. I mean, that's a good basketball player. The other thing that was just striking to me was how thin, truly thin and young Cooper Flagg looks in person. I had seen him before, in person walking around a hotel or at Cameron Indoor and just walking around basketball practice. I had not really watched him up close and impersonal. This kid's thin, and he didn't zone out of the game, but it was very familiar when I was watching Mahomes come back with some late touchdown passes. Cooper Flagg got good late in that game, and obviously, gamers are going to game. But he kind of was neutralized in a lot of ways. And what exactly was Clemson doing to take him out of his rhythm, Coach?
Well, you brought up an interesting point, and they said it almost 5 or 6 times, although it was more for the euphoria of Coach Vitale being back on the mic, back in the arena, that Cooper Flagg could technically, by age standards, still be in high school. he's still a very young person, right? And there's only so many people built and structured like LeBron James was in high school, where they come out with that 230, 240 frame. And I remember seeing that firsthand when LeBron James was in high school and recruiting. Cooper Flagg's got the frame that when he does get to the next level, is probably going to need to add 20 to 30, maybe even 35 pounds. But for right now, that's not sustainable. Now, he did end up cramping late in the game as well. I venture to guess on the road, at least. I didn't go back and look at their schedule, David, but I don't know how many environments like that he's been in just quite yet. Not that it's hot in a lot of different places. You can dehydrate in a lot of different ways, right? Your body can react differently. You never really know, especially in the wintertime when you're traveling. But I think the physicality and the maturity of the Clemson players that David mentioned, right? Bringing guys that have been there and done that before, being physical with them. I think that's clearly one way to negate length, is to kind of shrink it by being physical with it. And it wasn't just Flag, but I think all of that length gets negated when you're physical with it. And they did get a pretty good whistle, but the other part of that too, from a statistical standpoint, Clemson almost got half of the missed shots that they missed. They got 11 offensive rebounds. Duke only had 15 defensive rebounds. Now, a large part of that is because Clemson didn't miss a lot of shots from two. They only took 10 threes, as David mentioned, 4 for 10, those 6 misses, but they also went 63% from two. But when you're rebounding almost half of the misses, you're going to be in a lot of games, whether you're making free throws or not, because you're getting more possessions and the other team's not scoring. I just don't think they ever really gave Duke a chance to kind of blow the game open for themselves. They controlled their pace and their tempo. They controlled what they wanted to do on the offensive end, and they were able to kind of neutralize any potential threat by getting to the offensive boards. And they kind of willed it at the end there. I mean, they overcame some missed free throws. I could have locked it up late. You mentioned the missed free throws. I think 3 or 4 of them came late in the game, where it could have been a 2 or 3 possession game. It might have been a heck of a lot easier. Nevertheless, I think this is going to be a game that could be looked upon. These are one of the games when you get into the postseason and you're playing Duke in the tournament, you're looking for commonalities. You're looking for reasons why, and not just because they lost the game, but there's a lot to take apart and study from this for teams that may not or may be like-minded or like-structured in Clemson as to how they got this done. I think the one thing you can kind of point back, regardless of the roster makeup of your team compared to Clemson, is beating them on the boards and really taking advantage of the offensive rebounds. Young teams inherently don't really kind of get and understand how important defensive rebounding is, like to really go attack the board. Now, and again, nitpicking is a great way to say it, because Duke still is what Duke is from a talent standpoint. But if there's one thing that stood out to me, I thought it was the fact they're able to neutralize some of the open court things. How many times have we seen that from Cooper Flag this year, where he takes a rebound and it's off to the races as the point forward, and it either leads to a great kick out or a draw and kick or some highlight dunk? Didn't really have a chance to do that at all, because you neutralize transition in one of two ways. You either send 3 or 4 guys back and then load up the paint and just concede the rebound, or you kind of say, okay, we're going to send 2 or 3 to the glass and we're just going to outwork you on the glass and limit your transition by getting the rebound. I think that was one way that they were able inadvertently as a team to kind of neutralize the effect that Cooper Flag could have had on the game.
It's going to be interesting to watch too, Mike, how Duke responds the next time there's game pressure. As Coach said, there's no reason to even think about the panic button, much less look at the panic button or push the panic button if you're Duke head coach Jon Scheyer. But lingering in the background, and I actually thought Jon Scheyer and Duke's decision to add a non-conference game against a quality Illinois team. They actually played Illinois on February 22nd. It's one of the only games for any ACC team the rest of the way that is an out-of-conference game. And obviously, Illinois is a good, well-coached, physically tough team. So that'll be another challenge, just like this trip to Clemson was a challenge. But during the Blue Devils, I think it was a 16-game winning streak before they lost at Clemson, which was the longest winning streak in the nation. Most of those were blowouts. I mean, the game prior to Clemson, they beat Syracuse by like 100. I know it wasn't that, but it felt like 100 on that trip to face the Orange on the road. They beat Carolina, obviously, at Cameron by 17. They did face some game pressure against Wake Forest, even a little bit when NC State visited Duke. There was a little game pressure. But most of these wins by the Blue Devils have been blowouts. So, way back at the beginning, the loss to Kentucky, the loss to Kansas, the win over Arizona, the win over Auburn. I mean, Duke's got some incredible crown jewels on their resume. And then, yes, they faced a ton of game pressure against those elite opponents in non-conference play. But, man, these last 16-1 would be their record now. There might only be 3 or 4 games out of those 17 where they faced game pressure. And obviously, there's inevitably, no matter how good you are, there's going to inevitably be game pressure come the NCAA tournament. And with so many freshmen out there, that's just one more thing John Shire needs to think about and make sure they react the right way. I actually think more Duke players than not reacted well at Clemson, right? I mean, Proctor was great. James was reliable. Malik Brown was good off the bench. Flag was flag. Malawatch, not so much. The bench overall, not so much. And Knipple has to just be careful about the foul trouble. Maybe he learned a lesson there. But game pressure is, of course, you want to win by as much as possible. But it's part of the learning curve, especially for young teams, to fight your way through game pressure, home, road, or neutral. And the Blue Devils, again, more good than bad at Clemson. We'll see what they do against Illinois. But I don't think they really faced a hot box environment the rest of the way. Like a trip to UVA, a trip to Miami, of course, nothing hot boxish about that for the Blue Devils. And that trip to the Smith Center has all sorts of festivities awaiting at the end of the regular season. But as famous as the Smith Center is, it's not really accurate to call it a hot box the way I think of Little John or, Cole Fieldhouse back in the day at Maryland or a variety of other places that Duke has been this year.
This is the moment we waited for. Everything you want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot 'em my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same